There is a version of the mind that never quite finishes. It takes an ordinary moment, a text message, a conversation that ended slightly wrong, a decision that felt fine at the time, and it keeps returning to it. Turns it over. Examine it from a new angle. Runs the alternative version of what could have been said. Rehearses the response to a problem that hasn't happened yet. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, the person experiencing it knows, intellectually, that this is not useful. They know the thinking has stopped being productive. They know they should stop, and they cannot. This is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of discipline or willpower or emotional maturity. It is the output of a system that was built by very specific early experiences to believe that thinking more would eventually produce safety. And understanding what the system was built for and why it keeps running is the only thing that actually changes the relationship with it. Overthinking, in the psychological sense, is not the same as thinking carefully. Thinking carefully is finite. It has a goal. It arrives at a conclusion. It stops. Overthinking is circular. It returns to the same territory, repeatedly, without producing resolution, because resolution was never really the goal the system was running toward. The goal the system was running toward was control. Specifically, the anticipation of every possible negative outcome in advance, so that nothing could arrive as a surprise, nothing could catch the person unprepared, nothing could happen that the thinking hadn't already rehearsed and survived. The problem is that this goal is, by its nature, unachievable. There are always more variables. There is always one more scenario the mind hasn't yet modeled. And so the thinking continues, not because it is failing, but because it is succeeding at its actual task, keeping the person in a permanent state of readiness for a danger that may or may not arrive. Psychologists call this anticipatory anxiety, the chronic orientation of the nervous system toward future threat rather than present reality. And research on its origins consistently points to the same territory. Early environments in which unpredictability was a genuine feature of daily life. Households where the emotional weather could shift without warning. Relationships where things appeared stable until they abruptly weren't. Experiences where the person learned that the cost of being surprised was high and that the only available protection was to stop surprising themselves by thinking far enough ahead. If this is landing somewhere in you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if understanding the real psychology beneath the patterns you've been living with is something you want more of, subscribing makes that work possible. Because the overthinking mind is not randomly constructed. It tends to have several specific features that are worth understanding individually, because each one was built for a purpose that made complete sense in its original context. The first feature is the replay loop, the compulsive return to a conversation that already happened, searching it for evidence of what went wrong, what was said incorrectly, what impression was left, what damage was done. This behavior is frequently misidentified as obsessive or neurotic. What it actually is, in most cases, is the mind attempting to revise an outcome it couldn't control in real time. The replay loop is the post hoc version of the in-the-moment readiness that couldn't operate quickly enough. It is trying, after the fact, to find the thing it should have caught before it was too late. The problem is that the past doesn't change under examination. And the loop continues, because that conclusion that the past doesn't change hasn't been fully absorbed. The second feature is catastrophic projection, the rapid movement of the mind from a relatively minor present concern to its most extreme possible consequence. The unanswered message becomes evidence of a deteriorating relationship. The slightly critical comment at work becomes the precursor to being dismissed. The minor physical symptom becomes the first indicator of something serious. This is not pessimism. It is a nervous system that has been conditioned to treat small signals as reliable predictors of large events, because in its formative experience, sometimes they were. The child who learned that a slight shift in a parent's tone reliably preceded something difficult will develop a mind that treats tone shifts as significant data points. That mind does not simply stop doing this in adulthood. It brings the same interpretive framework into every subsequent environment. The third feature is the perfectionism loop, the chronic, unsatisfying relationship with anything the person produces or performs. The overthinking mind tends to review output, not to appreciate what was achieved, but to identify every way in which it fell short of an internal standard that is, in most cases, unreachable. This feature almost always traces back to environments where the standard for acceptability was either unclear, inconsistent, or set at a level that consistently required more than the person was capable of delivering. The child who could never quite be certain what would be good enough develops into an adult whose inner critic never fully signs off on anything. The work is done, the approval doesn't arrive, and the thinking circles back to examine what might have been done differently. The fourth feature is the difficulty of being present. Overthinking is fundamentally a relationship with time, specifically with the future and the past at the expense of the present. The person caught in it is rarely fully in the moment they're physically occupied. They are in the conversation they had 3 hours ago, or the meeting they need to prepare for tomorrow, or the relationship dynamic they need to resolve before something goes wrong. And the present moment, which is the only place anything can actually be experienced or changed, passes through them rather than being inhabited. This is not inattention. It is the mind's learned conviction that the present moment is not where the important work happens. The important work, in its model, happens in the anticipation and the review, not in the living. Here is the paradox that makes overthinking so genuinely difficult to address through effort alone. The thinking feels productive. It feels like it is doing something. It feels like the alternative stopping, allowing the uncertainty to sit unresolved, being in the present without the protection of the analysis, would be somehow irresponsible, more dangerous, less prepared. And so the very thing that is exhausting the person also feels like the only thing standing between them and something worse. Stopping the thinking feels like dropping a weight the person is convinced they cannot afford to put down. But here is what the research on rumination, the clinical term for the involuntary, repetitive thought patterns that characterize overthinking, consistently shows. More analysis does not produce more certainty. It produces more anxiety, because the mind that is searching for certainty through thinking is engaging in a process that generates additional variables with every cycle rather than reducing them. The more you think, the more there is to think about. And the more there is to think about, the less safe the present feels. Rumination doesn't reduce the threat, it amplifies it. What reduces it is not thinking less, it is thinking differently. It is the gradual, patient development of a relationship with uncertainty that doesn't require its elimination as a precondition for stability. It is the slowly accumulating evidence that outcomes can be tolerated without being fully predicted. It is the recognition that the system that built this particular mind, the one that made preparedness feel like survival, was responding to a world that was genuinely less predictable than the current one. And that the mind, with time and the right conditions, can be updated. The overthinking that wears you out is not evidence of a broken mind. It is the evidence of a mind that worked extraordinarily hard to protect you. It just hasn't been told yet that it can rest. What is the thought your mind keeps returning to, that you wish you could finally set down, and do you know why it won't let go? Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.